Well, welcome everyone. This is a podcast recording for a podcast called Wilkes-Barre Connect podcast, done through the Chamber of Commerce, where we decided to discuss different issues within the community and how people can connect to the chamber, to local government, things of that nature. Today's guest for this podcast is Drew Popish, who is the Northeast Regional Director for Governor Shapiro. Sorry about that. I have too many names in my head right now. So, Drew, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And so today we're going to be talking about why your voice matters and the idea of advocacy. And looking through, it looks like going back to 2008, you started with the Hillary Clinton campaign, and that's sort of what, I did a little research. But looking back, and so it seems like you've been in politics, in advocacy, and these things for quite some time. What drew you to the idea of politics and working in this field?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I had no desire to fall in this career. It kind of like came to me in a weird way. I think that probably, I just think that I wanted to be involved. I feel very strongly that decisions are being made every single day by whether it be politicians or lawmakers or community leaders. And I feel like if you're not involved, they're being made for you. And I just felt like that kind of was unfair. I didn't feel like there was it didn't make sense to me, I guess. I couldn't like rationalize it. And I also think that because I was so young, that people when they're a certain age, they feel like they have to wait to be an adult to get involved in politics. And that is just whoa. We're off to the races, guys. Here we go. I just think that that's so outrageous because if you look throughout history, it was really young people that were so pivotal to political movements or activist movements. If you're looking at like the civil rights movement or like if you're looking at gun safety or climate issues, activism, young people are really at the spear of it. And I just feel like, I didn't feel like, I don't want to say not welcomed in it, but I didn't feel like I had a voice to really, I didn't feel like I had anything to offer. So why would I get involved? I always voted, and that was always a huge thing for me. But then as I got to my first election, presidential election, 2018, 2008, that was when I was like, well, I do have a voice. And I do believe that, this is going to sound so corny, but I do believe in the power of collective action. And, we might feel like our voice is so small because we're one voice, but collectively, we really could move mountains. And I just thought it was so outrageous that you're going to make a law that tells me what to do or it impacts me directly and I'm not going to have a say in it. That makes no sense. And I was like, no, I have to get involved in some way. So I literally just started by volunteering and making phone calls for Secretary Clinton. And then that turned into a full-time job. And then everything else just I just figured it out. I'm just failing uphill every day, And
so what's been your motivation to stay in politics and using your voice and sort of being this activist out here on a regular basis, sort of speaking up for all these issues?
Yeah, well, that's a good question because I wanted out. I did want out. And I think it's very important to say, too, here today, I'm in my capacity as Governor Shapiro's Northeast Regional Director, so I'm not in a political capacity anymore. I did serve as the organizing director for the state party for many, many years, so I was very political. I wanted out, and then I thought 2016 was going to be my last election for many reasons. And then I realized, I was like, no, you're not getting out. There's so much more work to do, and there's so many more voices that need to be heard. And I feel like everyone has a story, and I want to hear that story. And I also think the power, diverse perspective is so crucial to any conversation. And when I say diverse, I think people sometimes are afraid of that word.
Right. Yeah.
I mean diverse across the board. I think that an urban student, a rural area student, anyone with a different perspective and background is so important to every conversation that's being had because that perspective is going to shape laws and their voices need to be heard in order to have a fair and just society. Is this making sense at all to anyone? Because my brain 100%. Is so shot. But do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I really just felt I was I can't quit because that's stupid. And also why the hell am I going to quit and let them make laws about me? That's not I want to have a say in it. And I think everyone should have a say in it. And it doesn't matter what level. And it's also, you're never too young to get involved. You don't have to wait just until you're legally able to vote. Like what I was saying about the civil rights movement, the activism and all that stuff, you can get involved by just even going to your local city council meetings or your county council meetings and just figure out what your community leaders are doing. and getting involved that way, or even just like raising your voice or giving your opinion. It's going to help shape so much.
And so you talk about, especially the youth getting involved, and I think that over time we've seen the youth be more and more engaged. Because yes, you had the children's movement of the civil rights movement and the Children Crusaders and these things, but I think it's more and more children are getting involved. But you talked about how you also didn't feel welcomed at first. Yeah. What would you say to someone who's 16, 17, 18, who wants to raise their voice but feels that whether it's their community or the government or their school feels like they're on the outside looking in and that they're not welcome? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say you use your voice because you have it. I didn't feel welcome first. I mean, 2008 was a very different time than we're in now. So when I walked into even just like a field office to volunteer, before I even worked full time, there was no one at that table that sounded like me, that like acted like me, that was had my perspective. And then I felt like a fraud for most of it because I was like, these people are like so smart, and I'm just like this like goofy kid from Scranton, and like, what am I doing? And then I realized like I was so much better at the work ethic than they were, and I thought, well, there's my in. I can just work super hard, and I'll just get in that way. And I also felt like they needed my perspective, because if the world does not look like just them,
right?
But the laws reflect just them, and that's outrageous. And that's like, I was like, no. And like, when you have these conversations, you can't leave people out. Yeah. Like you just can't, because I evolve every single day on issues, especially issues that I never thought I would, and that's specifically from this job. The last 2 years, I won't say what the issues are because I don't want to get crucified, but I was extremely passionate about a certain issue, and then I actually got out of the bubble of the people that have the same opinion as me, and then I was like, wait, that actually makes sense. And the rural areas that I get to represent, because I have 18 counties, and the bulk of it is all rural, and I knew nothing about rural America. And I thought, well, how am I going to take this job and go into these 18 counties and be like, hi, you're like from a farm, like I know everything about farms. Like they're going to be like, no, I don't smell BS, I don't buy BS, and I certainly don't, I don't, and so do most people. So I just went in and was like, listen, I know nothing about rural areas, but I want to help you. So can you please educate me? Like, I'm just here to help. And like those voices, like they are so important at the table, because like they have been forgotten for so long. And well, they think they were forgotten by government. And guess what? Like they really were to an extent. And that's like, we want to change that. And I just was like, well, wait, let me like try to help like bridge the gap between like government you think failed you and like you're not involved, to like I will help you with that bubble, because like who wants me in that bubble down there in Harrisburg? So I'm gonna get fired. What was your question?
You answered it, I promise. But I do want to go back to something.
I would tell that young kid, like, no, you just keep going, because it's ridiculous. Like, don't you dare like listen to this idiot who doesn't even know what he's talking about, like running your local election. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, no, you're not going to make a law. Like, please. And one of the things that you just talked about, you said that when you walked into the room, no one looked like you or sounded like you or acted like you. Can you talk about the importance of representation and what that really means for, especially the youth who want to get involved? Yeah. Well, certainly I would assume that now those rooms look very different when you go to a campaign office. But back then, especially for the candidate that I was going for, it was all very, mature men and women, and they just thought I was like a kid, and like, what does he know? And then I was like, they're like, what are you here for? Like, do you are you supporting her because like you think like her clothes are nice? And I was like, well, no, actually, I really like her foreign policy, and I like the fact that she's a little hawkish. And then they just didn't know what to say, and I was like, yeah, so you could sit down. And I was like, why are you here? Because like the laws that are being formed today are going to affect me. Like, we have the power to shape like the world that we see 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. Like, boo, you're like leaving soon. So like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I have more of it. Like, I have more at stake here than you do. So I am absolutely welcomed at this table, and I belong at this table, and I will be at this table. Yes. and I think that it's so important that our table, because you know that saying, what was it, like, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu or something? Yes. That is so true though. And it doesn't, and that again, back to diversity, because people are afraid of that word. I'm talking rural, I'm talking urban, I'm talking everyone at the
Yes.
table with
Yeah.
all different voices and all different perspectives, because you might actually learn something. You know what I mean? I learn something every single day because I don't know.
Well, and I say that, we only know our lived experiences. And so
Sure.
until we experience other people's lives,
Yeah.
we can't learn about them or learn how to even interact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk about some of the stories that you did learn being someone who didn't understand rural America and that this is your
yes,
region?
I can. So, number one, rural areas. They are developing urban issues that can't be solved with urban solutions, like right off the bat. People don't realize the one good thing about rural areas that have felt forgotten by government. They kind of formed their own coalition. Like they have the solutions in rural America, they just don't have the money, and that's what we need them at the table. So I was thrilled when the governor, when he was doing his budget proposal. When he was drafting the budget proposal, we had policy meetings with the budget office and our policy office and the stakeholders in the Northeast. And we specifically did by issues, so like K through 12 or rural housing or what have you. And we had a virtual call where these stakeholders of mine were able to speak directly to the people that were drafting and proposing this budget. And my number one rule was no one from Harrisburg speak, like let all the stakeholders that have the solutions know that, like, pretend like money was not had nothing to do with this. Just tell us what the solution is. And I think like 75% of it made it into the budget proposal. 55% of it got passed. And that was like the importance of their voice coming to the table. So when you think of like even crime, when I said like, rural areas are developing urban issues, even crime, think about it, if you are going to commit a crime in, Wayne County, right? The police are not there after 5 o'clock and they're not there on the weekends. They don't have full-time police. I live in Scranton. I have like 12 cop cars on my street waiting for crime. So I'm like used to crime. I'm used to cops. I'm used to crime, guys. I'm used to like a police presence. I don't know what the hell that's like. When I was like, well, where is your senior high rise in one county? And they were like, well, we can't get economic developers here because like we don't have central sewage. Like we don't have, and I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean you don't have, like, that doesn't make sense to me. I often think about the woman I met in Sullivan County, and she's 76 years old. She was a widow. She has no car. They have their broadband is just a disaster, which we are changing because we did make some pretty damn good investments into broadband. But she has no broadband. The store is an hour and a half away from her home, and she lives alone. Like, she doesn't have a car. Like, how is she? They don't have full-time transportation. Wow. So how is this person surviving? How is this person literally? And I feel like she has so many of them throughout the country, not just in Pennsylvania. And I just keep thinking about that, and I was like, that haunts me. And then I was just in Tioga County a couple of times. They had a horrible flood from storm. What is it, Debbie? The one that we just had. And a certain township, Westfield Township, it's on the border. I mean, to get there, it's 3.5 hours. You have to go to the New York border, and then it's right next to Potter County. And my heart, and this is gonna be, oh my God, this is gonna be so bad because I am gonna get a little emotional about it. So these people in Westfield Township, they got hit so hard and they lost everything. And they were already a community that didn't have much to start with. And that's what killed me. I thought, like, this is like a cruel joke. They lost everything. So the first week, everything was underwater. There was an actual river in their street. And I'm talking homes off the foundation. And I went up there, and then a week later, I went up there. And the difference of how it was being cleaned up. And then 2 weeks later, and 3 weeks later, and we just had the governor there last week, and it looked night and day. Now, Pima was there, and they did a wonderful job doing the assessments and things like that. But the actual cleanup was done by the community. Oh, wow. It was just these people caring for each other. And I thought, like, this is so unheard of, but it only happens in rural America. It really does. Because, we're from Scranton. I hate to say this, but like, if my house is on fire, I don't even know if my neighbor would tell me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think she'd be like, "Oh, that's terrible." So, but like, the way they just step, like, it was so inspiring. Right. And like, to me, I learned so much, and like, I feel like I'm just gonna die on the cross for rural America because it needs to be heard. But their issues are just every county has different issues, but they all tie into the same thing, like housing. Right. And I always say public health is the center of all of it, because if you're not gonna have a good school or a clean park, or you're not going to incentivize workers to come in for your workforce. I mean, it's all one big, intersecting thing. But I hope that answers your question. I don't know what I am saying. Like, no one should see this.
You are doing amazing.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, and I thank you for sharing that. And I think it's interesting that in a conversation about diversity and voice and these things that you bring up the notion of rural America, which when we think about the idea of diversity, that's not the first place we go to.
Yeah.
In fact, it's usually the last place, but that there are issues in every community. And I think that that's something that's often lost when we talk about voice and diversity is that every community actually does have issues.
Yes.
Regardless of whether or not you agree with them politically or on other areas, there are issues that need to be solved. And you're talking about the notion of, well, they don't have economic access or they're not these things, but those are things that also happen in urban areas as well. And so it's this weird notion that what you're describing can also work in a larger city and be an issue there. And so that when we strip all those other factors away, it's just the issues at the end of the day. And so how do we get to this point where if we solve the issues in Sullivan or Wayne County, and then we can go, well, wait, if that worked there, maybe that works in Scranton. Maybe we can use some. How do we get to that point where we're really issue focused and moving beyond everything else?
You use your voice. But seriously, you use your voice, you work together, you communicate. Like, listen, especially when it comes to politics, I don't care how someone votes on election day. I care about what they do the day after election day. That's what matters most to me right now. You want to, everyone has the right to vote however they want, even if I completely disagree. But like you just said about the issues. Now, think about it. If you're talking about mental health, right? Say you went to a summit on mental health and there was a roundtable discussion. 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a superintendent representing schools. You're going to see, a nonprofit that's taking care of it, things like that. When I had my roundtable for mental health, I made sure there were farmers at that roundtable. Because guess what? Farmers are killing themselves in record numbers right now because they have such pride in their generational farms and they're losing their farms. And these are not men and women who feel comfortable speaking up and saying, like, I feel horrible. I'm losing this family farm that was like, my great-great-grandfather's. And like, that's a perspective that I guarantee you most people don't think of when they think of mental health.
Right.
And I'm like, well, hell no, they need to be at the table. Like, because they need to, like, people have to be aware of that. It's not just happening in our schools and, elsewhere. It's happening in rural farms, just sitting there. And who is talking to these people? You know what I mean? And that perspective is going to change policy because our policies, like I said before, like they're being drawn for us, but like if we're only talking to a certain margin of people that look a certain way, then a hell of a lot of important voices are just gonna be left out of the conversation, and that is not going to make for a better and fair society. It just isn't. So, but yeah, I guess to answer your actual question, I guess just communicating and actually like being a team. NEPA is very unique because you know how we are here. We have our border of like Orange, Lackawanna, the Luzerne, and all this stuff, and right. And then, like, especially like when you're up in Hazleton, I mean, that's like when they're like, well, we don't consider it like because it's it's all the way over there. And I'm like, well, first of all, I drive 4.5 hours to get to one of my regions. So that's 45-minute ride. That's nothing. But like just the I think that's why it's so important that we pay attention, use our voices too, and make sure that these people that we have faith in and we trust them that they're making these policies that shape tomorrow. But I guess just communicating and just showing like this actually works. And again, in rural areas, it works. They communicate with each other. They help each other. Potter County is coming over to the assessment table in Tioga for their flood damage. Like it does work if people actually just kind of separate, all that other.
And just focus on the issues at hand.
You just focus on because think about it. Okay, ready? Here we go. Agriculture. That to me is a conversation that should be had at every table because it is such a topic that everyone could agree on. We all got to eat, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever the hell you are. Agriculture. That is what I keep saying. Hell, I'm sorry. Is that like a bad
you're
word
completely fine.
to have? I got called out on TV one time for saying that. So.
I will not call you out.
And I was like, it's a place. And I feel like I'm living in it. But so everyone's got to eat, right? So then if you're having a conversation about agriculture, then you're actually discussing other things at that table. You're realizing, wait a minute, I actually agree with you on so many things. Do you know how many Republicans I agree with? Like 10 years ago, people would be like, that's not true. Like you would never but seriously though, because that's where my mind was. I agree with so many different things when it comes to local issues,
right?
Because I'm understanding them now, and I'm hearing a different voice, and I'm hearing a different, and they're understanding my perspective as a Democrat, and like all this stuff. And I think that's so important. Like it's so important to like get back to like us using our voices in a respectful way,
right?
And us actually respecting other people's voices. But you have got to allow you have to be back in. I feel like years ago you had to be allowed into the room. Right? And get a folding chair and wait your turn. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think you use your voice, speak up, and you just get in.
Yeah.
Just get in there and do it.
Well, and I love that as a way to sort of wrap this up is the idea that by using your voice, you can actually focus on the issues and get through everything else.
And it doesn't have to be political.
Right,
It doesn't have to be just politics or your candidates and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking just your activism issues. You want to care? Do you care about the water you drink or the air you breathe?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Basic things or local issues. Like, do you care? Because you see a pothole. It's like, oh, well, this is this one's fault and this one's fault. Everything's everyone's fault, but no one has control over anything.
Right.
And that's the grand thing, especially over in the county. Do you know what I mean? Like, there really is no. But it happens though. If you look at something and they come to me and they say, well, this, and I'll say, well, that's a municipal road.
Right.
And like, there's no control over that here, but it's always someone's fault. Like those issues, like just it doesn't have to be a political thing.
Right.
And there's ways of using your voice now too that I think are so different than it was back then. Social media is huge. Mm-hmm. If you're using reliable sources, if you're using reliable educational videos or reliable news sources and stuff, you could voice your opinion on things, and that right there is a way of getting involved without necessarily being in politics or getting involved in elections, which you should, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But voting is obviously the most important way to use your voice.
Right.
But there are so many other avenues too to use your voice.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for your time this morning.
God,
this was amazing. Yeah, that was it. That was all of it. So,
I didn't even curse.
well, and thank you all for being here for this episode of the Wilkes-Barre Connect podcast.